Scott, first of all, thank you so much for coming on. Huge honor. One, to meet you, but two, to sit across you, pick your brain. Obviously, an expert in leadership. But let me first start with a quick bio for those that don't know who you are. I think you'd have to be living under a rock, especially in this community, to not know who you are. But Lieutenant Colonel Scott Mann is a former U.S. Army Green Beret with tours all over the world, including Colombia, Peru, multiple tours in Afghanistan. He's a warrior storyteller, host of the Scott Mann podcast, and the founder of Rooftop Leadership and Scott Mann Leadership Academy, where he shares the rapport building and storytelling skills he learned in the special operations to help leaders today make better human connections in high-stake, low-trust engagements. Scott is the author of Nobody's Coming to Save You, a leadership field guide to making better human connections in this time of division, and the instant New York Times best-selling Operation Pineapple Express, a third-person narrative detailing the harrowing stories of veterans, volunteers, and Afghan allies who navigated the U.S. abandonment of support veterans. Of Afghanistan in August of 2022. He is the founder of the 501c3 task force Pineapple that supports veterans and educates civilians. Scott is also a playwright and actor with his award-winning play, Last Out, Elegy of a Green Beret, touring stages across the country to provide healing to our veterans and families of the fallen, as well as providing insight into our citizens on the personal cost of the longest war in our nation's history. Scott, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I appreciate it. It's good to be here.
I'd love to know, I've seen you on a couple podcasts. Obviously, we got a mutual connection through Doc Diego, but I don't know if I've ever heard just kind of the backstory of where you grew up, what state, and then, I'd love to start there and then kind of move through how you ended up in the SOF community.
Yeah, sure. Again, I appreciate being on, man. My whole family is from Western North Carolina, up in the Appalachians, around Asheville. My dad was a wildland firefighter for the U.S. Forest Service and a forester. So we spent most of my childhood in the Southeast. A lot of times in little logging towns. That the one I spent most of my time was in Arkansas. A little town called Mount Ida. Didn't even have a stoplight. It was less than 1,000 people, and that's where I spent middle school, high school, my formative years. And when I was 14, I met a Green Beret. He had come home on leave to visit his dad, and it was one of those things where complete serendipity. I was a runt of a kid and pretty bullied, and just kind of always on the outside looking in of things. Moved a lot. And when I met this guy, his name was Mark. He was just a really great guy, first of all, but it was just the way he kind of carried himself and the fact that he sat down with me and talked to me about special forces at 14 and really talked to me as someone who he could tell was enamored with this whole thing and didn't talk to me, like patronizing, like a lot of adults did, a lot of my peers did. It was, just talking to me straight about Green Berets and how they work by, with, and through indigenous people, and they help them stand up on their own, and how they're different than the other special ops units, and that focus more on unilateral direct action, surgical strike kind of things. And I don't know, I just fell in love with it. I just thought at 14, I knew that's what I wanted to do. It was not even a question, and it never changed for me. For the rest of my time through school, college, I planned, obsessed, trained, prepared for when I could become a Green Beret, when I could try out at least. And so I lived on a steady diet of Vietnam LERP and Special Forces books, and went through ROTC and got commissioned at University of Central Arkansas, and then went in the Army for, 4.5 years, mostly in Panama, back when we had troops in Panama, until I could try out to become a Green Beret. I tried out in 1995 and made it through after a couple of recycles. I think I recycled every school in the Army at least twice because I liked them so much, I guess. But but I finally got my Green Beret, I think in 96, and went to 7th Special Forces Group. Central and South America during the 90s, and then post 9/11 stayed in 7th Group and mostly Afghanistan. So that's kind of the Reader's Digest version of it. But I loved it. It was more than I ever thought it would be. I think I spent about 23 years in the Army, and 18 of that as a Green Beret, and working with these amazing NCOs and leaders who were just so good at mobilizing people to take action and getting big stuff done by working indirectly through people. And I think that was probably what has inspired me on the other side of the Army to do what I do today.
Going back to that Green Beret when you were 14, what was it about that conversation? Was it him? Was it, maybe just your calling in life? I'd be curious if you go a little bit deeper, what really pricked your heart or your mind in that conversation?
Yeah. I always go back on things from my life now that I'm in my late 50s, and I look at them again. And one of the, and just in my training as a storyteller, one of the things I've learned is, we choose the storyteller before we choose the story. That's just how we are as social creatures. And I know that's absolutely true with Mark. I chose him because he just looked the part. He kind of had a swagger to him. He wasn't cocky, but you could tell there was so much confidence, and you could just tell he loved what he did. And when he talked about his adventures working by, with, and through indigenous people around the world, he was in 5th Group. I just was entranced by that. And this idea of kind of a modern day Lawrence of Arabia, the way I described. So it was him, but it was then when he sat down with me and he described the mission, that's when I was just pinned to the mat. That's when it was, because there was something about this whole, helping the little guy stand up against the big guy thing that really resonated with me as a runt. And it had, and just the kind of expeditionary nature of it, I suppose, just this little team of guys on their own halfway around the world, like, moving in and just getting surrounded on purpose. And that to me was so cool. And, I've talked to other Green Beret. I've interviewed so many people over the years. There's a lot of guys that joined Special Forces because they met that guy. A lot of people saw Rambo, and I would be lying if I said that wasn't influential too, but I don't know. It was the dude, and then it was the story he told.
How much of your own story now, this is a little bit probably more in your wheelhouse, but I'm curious, you lead, different organizations, one of them specifically tied to storytelling. How much, once we have an established story about our past and people have an established story about their past, who they are, but then they go through these growth cycles, how often for you do you go back, and is there a shift in your understanding and maybe the way you tell your story, and more so about yourself? Obviously you're sharing it sometimes publicly, but I'm curious for you what that process is like.
That's a great question. More so of late, Chris, in the sense that when I got out of the Army, I had a really bad transition. And I know we'll probably talk about that, but storytelling saved my life. I was in such a depth of depression, such a loss of identity, that storytelling gave me a renewed sense of self. And I think it helped me make meaning of things that made no sense. And it was only after that I started, going back into storytelling and really studying the science, not just the art, and working with Doc Diego, for example, and other mental health professionals, but also, looking at the neuroscience of it, looking at the social science of it. And what consistently came up every time is that the brain has a mandate to make sense of the world. It uses story to make sense of things. It is a storytelling, a sense-making mechanism that we've had for 100,000 years. And once I accepted that, and once I realized that, wow, like, it's not just me using story to make sense of things. If I want to influence people, the brain of my listener needs to make sense of what I'm saying. And they're going to either tell themselves a story, or they can use my story if I tell one. And what I found was story gave me, because we're all telling ourselves a story all the time. Right? We're all living our hero's journey every day. And our life happens in moments. and we build narratives around those moments. And I think I am more conscious and intentional now about recreating and reinventing my stories and developing new patterns for my brain as I go, whether that's in the arts or whether that's something new I want to try that scares the hell out of me. This notion of reinventing one's story, one's narrative as you go, now has just become like, I love it. It's terrifying, but it's invigorating, and I think it's really helped with my post-traumatic growth a lot.
I want to deviate. I want to come back to you for a second, but speaking of storytelling, and you being a storyteller, what do you think the story is on America's leadership right now? Just on a 30,000 foot view, if you were going to tell the story of America's leadership in its current state, what would that story be?
It would be one of divisionism. It would be one of shadow tribalism inspired by divisionist leaders. That would be like that, some kind of working title, because I believe that, if you look at a liberal democracy, and I don't mean liberal in the sense of conservative
Sure.
liberal, I mean, more in the traditional sense of a democracy, republic. Our ability, this is a new experiment in civil society. It's not been around that long, and it puts emphasis on the individual. But a guy named Alexander de Tocqueville, he came to the United States over 100 years ago from France to look at this experiment in democracy, and he went back and he reported that America has this unique ability to display individualism rightly understood. And in that, if you look deeper at what he was talking about, is we put emphasis on the individual in our Constitution, our Bill of Rights, our rule of law, whereas human nature is tribal. Human nature is status, group dynamics. And so you go to a place like rural Afghanistan or Iraq, most places in the world, the group dynamic is at the epicenter of society. And so rule of law is not so much. I mean, it's more about the rule of the clan, because it's honor and shame and status, and the group dynamic trumps the individual. So your status is based on your relationship within the group. America is not like that. It's not, at least not in its founding. It's based actually on the individual. Thank you, baby. And it's different, but it requires a level of stewardship and leadership to maintain this, because if you put emphasis on the individual above the group, that's not a natural state of affairs. That has to be managed. It has to be led. There has to be stewardship. And I think that's what de Tocqueville was talking about when he said individualism rightly understood. There's this balance of, yes, I'm an individual, but there's also a connection to my tribal past, to my communal past, to the collective, that is also important, right? And it's kind of like I use an iceberg analogy, with above the waterline is the modern world, and below the waterline is the tribal world. And the bulk of us are tribal. So 80% of our humanity is that below the waterline piece, but you got to have a foot in both, and what it seems to me today is that we've forgotten our past. So everything below the waterline is invisible. We're heads down in our dopamine dispensers. And so we're living in a two-dimensional world, but our leaders, who we rely on to be those stewards of rule of law, of democracy, out of many come one, all of those things that are a delicate balance, they have abandoned that in favor of an approach that I call divisionism. And I don't even think it's a word, but what I define, my working definition of it, is leaders who foment instability by creating in-groups and out-groups in pursuit of a narrow objective. And if you look around, that's what you see on both sides, are these divisionist leaders. When's the last time you heard someone really profess out e pluribus unum and you felt like they meant it? I can't even remember. And so you have these divisionist leaders, and what it's doing, Chris, and I'll land on this, is I think it's harnessing and leveraging our fear, our anger, our scarcity mentality, and all of, see, even though we are not connected with our tribal past is still connected with us. And I think we ignore our past at our peril. And so our leaders divide us into in groups, out groups, social media, 24/7 media. It all puts us in groups and out groups, and we don't even know we're in it. Dr. Ivan Tyrrell says we're in a trance state. Anger makes us stupid, and that we are kind of moving around in this fear-based trance state, dying on different hilltops for leaders that I wouldn't even let my kids teach civics to my kids. So I think the leadership in this country at a political level is in severe disarray. But even worse, I think that it is intentionally dividing us along factions and tribes, with full knowledge that we're asleep at the switch as a civil society body. That was a long way around, but I think about it a lot.
What's the way back? If we started this country with I think we both would agree, better leaders than what's currently in place. I'm curious, the roadmap in, Scott Mann has control of the world for one day or 1 week. Like, give me a plan of how leadership changes within America at the top.
Look, I think there is a way back. I write about this in my last book, Nobody's Coming to Save You, at the end, in the conclusion. I mean, I'll show the football as I talk about a guy named Robert Putnam, who wrote the book Bowling Alone. And in his book, Putnam asserted that, when our parents were younger and we were kids, they all belonged to things. They belonged to the Rotary Club and the Elks Club, and they bowled. And they bowled in leagues, and they won those big gaudy trophies that were 7 feet tall. And but now more people than ever bowl, but they bowl alone. They don't bowl in groups. We've lost our communal past. We've lost our connection. But what Putnam says, it's so interesting, and I subscribe to it, is he says that, in the early 1900s, we were in a similar place. We were in a dark place, the haves, the have-nots, the rigid ideology, speaking of each other with contempt. Urban centers were collapsing under the load. Rural areas were migrating. The youth were migrating out. Farming, as we knew it, was changing. Immigration was kind of out of control. And, the pundits were screaming, massive wealth disparities. And the pundits were screaming America was on her last leg, And in fact, in his book, The Upswing, Putnam writes, the first chapter, you think he's talking about today. And then he reveals that it was actually the early 1900s. But what was interesting was, right around that time, there was a couple of drunks in Akron, Ohio, Dr. Bob and Bill W., that couldn't get sober. Like, they could not get sober. The institutions failed them. Every time they would go to an institutional treatment, it would fail. And so they decided to have a meeting in Akron, Ohio, the two of them. They called it Alcoholics Anonymous. And they found a way to get sober, and it went and it went and it went. And around the same time in Chicago, a group of business leaders wanted to restore the power of community, and they started the Rotary Club. And not too far from there, the Lions Club and the Elks Club and Future Farmers of America and the Junior League. And from like 1900 to 1920 was the longest running period of social capital, bottom up, bridging trust in our nation's history. It ran from 1900 to 1972. And that's when all of these groups sprang up. And Putnam calls it the upswing. And I am 100% convinced we are on the edge of another one. Whether or not we're able to pull it off, I don't know. Sure. But I do think that's the way back. It's folks at the grassroots level. It's what you're doing with this podcast. It's what's happening across the country. My dad's work with the American Chestnut Foundation. I think there are massive bottom-up movements underway. And frankly, I think that there's a way for the population, if we choose to shake off this trance state that we're in and stop treating our neighbors with contempt, and frankly, just model what we expect of our politicians and either put them in line or vote them the hell out of office. Like, and there's a study, and I invite people to check it out, called The Hidden Tribes of America by More in Common. And what they found in this year-long study is 2/3 of the American people actually believe in civil discourse. And there's like 9 tribes in America of ideology, and 7 of them get along, you know? And so it's like 2/3 of the American people, they call them the exhausted majority in the study. They're just worn out. And because the mouth breathers have the microphones right now. And we need to take those mics back, I think. And I think it could happen. I think we're on the cusp of another upswing. It's just whether or not we're able to pull it off.
I think as a civilian, not a veteran, a lot of times, just this week, it happens every week, somebody assumed because of the organization that we build, I'm a veteran, but it's a unique position to look at what you guys are doing in various, I mean, the soft community and just veterans at large, how things are changing, how you guys are impacting. It's really interesting on a political level, but also, I mean, on a state, local level, watching the thirst for quality leadership and seeing specifically, I'll zero in on the soft community, more and more individuals stepping into that gap. And I think I think it's an indicator of the lack of leadership, like we're discussing, and a desire for, people exactly like you're talking about, people that are going to do the right thing, say things that need to be said that may not necessarily be acceptable or quote unquote politically correct, but need to be said, which good leaders, as you know, have to say difficult things in situations. But I think to your point about the connection, there's a huge loss of connection within, the larger community and the local community as a whole.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. And, first of all, I mean, kudos to you and a lot of the people, Doc Diego and other people that I run with that are, not veterans, but their advocacy for not just veterans, but for leadership in the country. I mean, I think veterans do offer a massive role in getting back to better days. However, there's no way, I don't think, that veterans can spearhead this unilaterally, nor should we. I think we have a role to play. And I think probably one area, it's not the only area, but I think is that we do know what it means to what Robert Putnam calls bridging trust versus bonding trust. So getting beyond this bonding tribal trust. We have a pretty good idea what it means to bridge, because in the military, you have to. You have to bridge beyond ethnicity and race and socioeconomic status to get missions done. So we understand what it means to have a foot below and above the waterline. Now, that said, I am seeing a lot of what you're talking about. I'm also seeing some concerning activity within the veteran community, particularly the global war on terror community, where we're tearing each other apart. I also see behavior and actions that don't bode well for us to model what right looks like, because we're demonstrating tribal behavior ourselves. And
Sure.
It's really unfortunate. And I think it needs to stop. We're in some cases we're celebrating people's demise and their actions like it's a Fortnite game, and you're doing your victory dance after you win. It's like, it's not, I don't know. It's just, it's not rampant, but it's concerning. I'm seeing some version of it, and I don't know if other people are as well, but I think that's a really important thing. And then the other thing is, I think, Operation Pineapple Express, Flanders Fields, Moral Compass, the veteran work in Western North Carolina when Hurricane Helene hit. I think there has never been a time, going back to this upswing, that we've seen such a potential for private-public partnership between not just led by veterans, I think bottom up, but our institutional leaders coming together, top down, bottom up, and solving a lot of these wicked problems. For example, and I'll give you a case in point, is the recent terrible shooting of the 2 National Guard soldiers. I think one was in the Air Force, but by the former Afghan special operator. You had that horrible thing that was terrible, and that individual should suffer swift and severe punishment. But at the same time, I don't believe we should go back and kick all of our Afghan allies out of the country who fought alongside us and who we made a promise to, and who have honored their side of the bargain. It's not right to like vilify them and make them an enemy of the state,
Right.
but yet that's what we're doing. And the conversations have turned vile,
Mm.
and rather than, in particular, listening to some of our global war on terror special operators and their families who have stayed on the phone with these individuals and helped them with their pension funds, basically using their own pension funds when the government should have been involved to help them not just get safe passage, but to resettle here, to just vilify and turn the page on our allies and the global war on terror veterans. I mean, it's egregious. I did a podcast on it, like a 1-hour podcast, and calling it out. And I tagged Secretary Nome, just saying, hey, can we talk about this? Can your office talk with veterans that we can help? They blocked me. A 23-year special operations veteran, they blocked me, and there you go. I mean, that's, I think that's what we're up against.
So I want to point out a couple of things on that note. I think you mentioned the upswing, right? So I think there's a couple of things that listeners and people need to comprehend, but also understand. I think some people look at, okay, Scott, like the upswing, I'm a civilian or I'm a first responder or whatever, I want to get involved. I found some gap or some issue that I want to champion, and I'm doing that. You, in all your experience and all your connections, you're getting blocked. And so I think there's a discouragement that some people say, why even try? Because I don't even have the bona fide and the relational collateral that Scott does. But on the other hand, I want to say between, the technology that we now have access to, and we can do this, the ability to quite literally access the entire world through social media. There's never been a time where I don't think you have, as an individual American, more tools and access to create whatever it is you want to create. And if it's a good product and it's successful, people are going to get behind it really, really quickly. And so there's something that, for our listeners, I just want to encourage them. At the end of the day, there is tools and there is opportunity, but you're going to experience pushback. You're going to experience rejections, no's across the board. You're going to champion causes, but that's a part of the fight. And I think that's one of the biggest things I want to encourage people. It's like, hey, Scott heard a no, but at the same time, like, he's still pushing forward and still opening his mouth and still writing books and still writing plays, because at the end of the day, like, that's what he feels called to do. And he's doing it over and over and over again. And he's going to make a huge amount of movement, whatever that looks like. And I think other people need to hear that message as well, as they can do the exact same thing in their own spaces and in their own ways, and maybe even more profound change and effect than you ever get to. But if they never start, they're never going to get there.
I think that's so well said. And, one of the things about storytelling is that the methodology that I follow, to achieve the upswing, I call it rooftop leadership. And I really learned that as a Green Beret. I didn't invent it, but I got the chance to see it again and again and again with some of the most amazing NCOs and special forces teams from across the inventory in rural Afghanistan, where, true modern day Magnificent Seven, where these little teams would go into these places and they would build relationships with locals that were completely decimated of trust. I mean, places that had seen 40 straight years of combat, they didn't trust each other. They didn't trust their government. They didn't trust us. And within weeks of getting into the community, the entire village would be up on the rooftop fighting back. And the reason is not because they had to, it's because they chose to, based on the relationships that these individuals built every day, going out when nobody was looking, when it was hard. And here's the big thing. In the beginning, when the attacks would come, there'd be a little ODA, a 12-man team up there on the roof, and that was it. Everybody else was too afraid to come up. But then, a few weeks later, you'd see a muzzle flash on another building, and then another muzzle flash, and then another muzzle flash. And before long, the whole collective was pouring fire into the Taliban and breaking it off before it ever even started, which was what they had always done. But somewhere along the way, they lost that. And I think that, so I started calling that rooftop leadership. And I think that's exactly what we need today. And I see it, what you're doing with your movement, what Doc Diego has done with his. My father, if you're, to your point on reluctance, he passed away this past summer, but he grew up in Appalachia, dirt poor, worked his way through college because his dad sold a hog to get him into NC State. But, before he died, he did a TED talk on the American chestnut and the restoration of a functionally extinct tree that went into a blight in the early 1900s. That was the cradle of forestry for centuries. And he did a TED talk on this thing. And my dad had a debilitating stage fright where he would hide in the toilet before he gave a talk. He gave a TED talk that's had over 250,000 views at 73, 6 months after recovering from cancer, and has raised hundreds of thousands of dollars for this tree. And this tree is on the verge of going back in the woods. Now, did that one talk do it? No, but it had a massive impact. And this is an old country boy from Appalachia. And so never served, right? But the point here is what you said. We've never had access like this to platforms to be heard. But if you worry more about being canceled and what people are going to think about you than what your mom and dad taught you was right, or whoever taught you that, then it won't work.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is, I'll go back to Afghanistan. This is where I see you guys being such an integral. I'll just speak for myself. I know I've learned it because I've been clinically working alongside individuals like yourself. I was talking to my students yesterday. I teach full time as well as do the other stuff that I do. But some students were asking me, and I said, here's what I learned working with the soft community in a clinical space. I was like, once I got in there, I realized they're no different than you or I. It's just once they've made up in their mind they're going to do something, they're not going to quit. And where I see that benefiting myself, but also I would say the larger community, is exactly like what you described in Afghanistan. We've experienced maybe poor leadership or some good leadership here or there, but on a larger stage, I think seeing somebody and having connection and being encouraged, like you're saying, is okay. I can get up on my roof now because I see these other Americans that are doing the same thing and fighting some of the same fights, and I want to get involved. And that's where I see personally, I think even in the podcast space, you go down the list of individuals that have been on different podcasts, host different podcasts. I think you guys are breathing life into the American spirit and reminding them who we are as a community. And this is something, go back to storytelling. You talk about, I've got a couple of colleagues that are from Africa, grew up in Africa. They know who they are based on the lineage and the past and who their tribe is. And I think obviously we could talk about the distortion of the American story and who we are and the bad things or the good things that we've done as Americans. But when we look across at individuals like yourself and see you guys standing up, quote unquote, on your roofs and doing the things that you're doing in spite of what people are saying about you, I think it breathes life into the American spirit and the American soul, where we want to look on our block, look in our area of expertise and say, hey, what can I do? And how can I get up on my roof and start pushing back? Because I think there's still, to your point about the upswing, there's a large amount of Americans that desire that upswing to happen again because they want better for their families and for their kiddos and their grandkids in what they've experienced.
100%. I agree. And, the thing is, I personally think if we're waiting, nobody's coming. Like if we're waiting for someone to come riding over the hill from Washington, D.C., I think we're deluded. That salvation of civil society is not going to come from the top down. We have to demand it. We have to model what right looks like. And I just believe that. And I think it's what we've always done. I don't think this is new. I just think that we're kind of, again, I talk about this shadow tribalism. I call it shadow tribalism because tribalism is not inherently bad any more than a liberal democracy is inherently good. Right. It's a system. It's a way of being in the world, and it's frankly artificial. It's what you make it to be. But there are a lot of civil society dynamics of tribalism that you talked about to your students that are wonderful because it reflects a connection to your past and an emphasis on story. Look, here's the thing. I think that we have a range of innate gifts, and you know this better than anybody, biological gifts, emotional gifts that equip us to navigate the world as meaning seeking, emotional storytellers who struggle. Like that's just who we are at a primal level, but we have these amazing gifts, storytelling being one of them. Um, the human connection, a propensity for human connection, social capital as another, rapport, a love of rapport, empathy. Like there's just so many that are available to us, but we've buried them.
Hmm.
We've buried them in an era of just obsession with mimicking machines and living in a two-dimensional world that's filtered. And our connection with the natural world has diminished, and our connection with our tribal past has diminished. If we want to reestablish ourselves I tell people all the time when I teach them as storytellers, what I call narrative competence. If you want to get people up on the rooftop, if you want to move people to action, get below the waterline again. Get back to our human nature, what I call the human operating system. Become a storyteller. Learn the art and science of storytelling in whatever your industry is, whether it's for profit, non-profit, doesn't matter. But develop that skill set, and it's amazing what you can do with that and a platform. And the platforms aren't hard to come by. The problem is most people don't prepare themselves and train themselves for the moment when they take the mic, and then it's real easy to just get isolated and shut down.
Yeah. I think as I'm thinking through this, I don't know if I've ever thought about this, so this is kind of off the cuff, but the storytelling process I think is critical from a personal development, I could say mental health aspect as well, because your skills of conceptualization, right? You have to see how things get put together, but then there's got to be critical thinking, and also I would say critical thinking about oneself in that. When you develop a cohesive narrative at the end of the day about who you are, it can't always be a victim mentality. It can't always be, you're the best in the world. There's got to be some critical thinking, which takes a good bit of discovery about self and open analyzation about oneself, but then to conceptualize it and wrap it in a cohesive narrative, I think is really, really important, regardless, to your point, of what you're doing. I think as a parent, it's important if you're going to pass down things that are important to your family and from maybe grandparents, aunts, uncles, you're doing that already, whether you realize it or not. And then to your point, whether it be industry or something that you have a pet passion about, or maybe it's actually your profession, equally, if we're going to communicate effectively and connect with other people, that storytelling demonstrates, okay, Scott's flexible. I hear how he made a mistake here, but what he learned about it, which tells me he's open to discussing faults, failures, vulnerabilities. It's not just a whitewash of here's how great you are, or the opposite of how terrible the world was to Scott. And I think that, to your point about our connectivity, it draws us in because it's like, okay, I know my failures. Scott's identifying some of his. Well, if he's sharing that, now I want to step up and have a swing at the ball.
Yeah, it's really good, man. I mean, because everybody is just around us. If you look around, there's just this spewing of dogma and rigid thinking. And Dr. Ivan Tyrrell in the Human Givens, he talks about the brain as a metaphorical pattern matching organ, right? And there's context matters. Context matters. Local context is important, but there's no context today. The 24/7 news, we can watch a car chase halfway around the world, and we're watching it like it's happening in our backyard, but there's no context, like zero. And we're making decisions. Look at the in-group, out-group behavior around the Afghan who shot the 2 National Guard soldiers. And granted, it was a horrific thing, but that's, contextually, when you look at the Afghan commandos and special operators that are here and what they did for us for 20 years, contextually it makes no sense to group them into a threat category. But that's what we're doing because there's no context. And, Dr. Kendall Haven, he has the best working definition of story that I've ever heard. And he says that a story is a character-based narration of a character who's trying to overcome obstacles or struggle to reach an important goal.
Say it
And
again.
it's a character-based narration of a character who is trying to overcome struggles in order to reach an important goal. Right. And that's a story, And so if you have those components, and what I've spent the last 15 years doing, Chris, is going, okay, cool. So let's unpack that. Like, let's just unpack that, and let's really do some, can we turn this into a competency? Can we turn, narrative competency? Could we make that a thing? And what I found consistently is the leaders who understand that working definition of story, and they go, all right, pretty much in any kind of influence, impact, struggle to resolution, we cannot look away from it. Like, we cannot, if the narration is struggle to resolution, and resolution being how we changed and what we learned, but we don't just start with that, like you said, 5 ways to be great like me. Like, it's unwatchable. Everybody's doing it. The people that just stand there on Facebook and they hold up the little microphone and they talk about the 5 hacks to life that'll make you happy. Like, but they haven't earned the right to tell you that.
Correct.
Right. So you look at them and you go, either they're full of shit, or I could never be like her.
Right. She's
too perfect. I could never do that. And so we don't try. Whereas if someone gets up there and they are generous with their scars, in other words, they repurpose their struggles through story that let you locate yourself in the story and go, oh my God, she's been through what I've been through. Like, now they choose the storyteller in that moment. They don't even know what the story is, but they choose the teller, because we're social creatures. So now the armor comes down. I go on what's called narrative transportation, and I'm autobiographically listening. I'm processing my own lived experience in the safety of this person's story. And now this whole thing is happening, man. This 100,000-year miracle is happening. And I'm making sense through your own struggle. I'm autobiographically making sense of mine. And that's the resolution piece. And that struggle to resolution 1-2 punch, I think that's where it's at, man. I think if leaders can find their own way to that, whether it's parenting, coaching, podcasting, is just let that be at your heart center. People are going to come to you. They're going to work with you. They're going to move, because it's what moves us all.
So, all right, let me circle back, because I want to hit on a few things, but I also want to get to what you're doing now. Obviously, super successful career within the soft community, specifically the SF community. Hard transition out. Take me through a little bit of the transition. Give me context of what was going on. Did you want to get out? Was it a medical time to get out? Take me through that.
Yeah, no, I when I heard you say, I kind of cringed when you said super successful career, because I don't know that it was. I don't think that it was. I think that I loved being a Green Beret and I did my best, but it wasn't super successful in the sense that I left Special Forces as an 05. I was a 3-time select for battalion command, and I turned them all 3 down. Because this was in 2012. I saw what was happening in Afghanistan with a program that I helped stand up called Village Stability, where we went in and worked very closely with indigenous tribes to stand up on their own, and it worked until we bailed on it. And a lot of Afghans that I helped recruit were killed, and really treated horribly. And for me, that was it. I couldn't. It was very clear to me where it was headed for Afghanistan, and I didn't want to be a part of it. And so I left. I retired, and didn't make a lot of friends in the General Officer Corps in doing that. I'd be basically turning down 3 commands, but I felt like whatever it was I did next, I needed to do it on the outside, and I didn't know what that was, and I was not prepared for transition, and I found myself in a very dark place very quick. The things that I should have been dealing with and facing, I had not. There admittedly was quite a stigma in my community at the time. At least I felt like there was, about mental health, and I certainly didn't talk about it to anyone, but I had.
What year did you come out?
What's that?
What year did you come out? Just so I've got some context.
2013 was when I retired.
Okay, yeah. So, yeah, the stigma was real still.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, to the point that even after I got out, I was going down the drain, and I couldn't even talk to I didn't feel like I could even talk to my wife about it.
Hmm.
I just needed to work harder. I needed to find ways to keep it together. And on the outside, I did. I had a good paying contract job. I was writing a book. I mean, I was doing all the things I guess you were supposed to do, but I was just falling apart, and a complete loss of identity and purpose. And um, took me to 18 months after I retired, standing in a closet holding a pistol.
Hmm.
And if Cooper, my middle son, hadn't come home when he did, I don't think I'd be here.
Hmm.
Um, and that wasn't the end of it for me. Like with my mental health journey,
Sure.
other times I stood in that closet and a lot of ideation and just lost. And it was really, I look back on it, it was a mentor who recommended me to a storytelling workshop out in California with an NFL football player of all things, a guy named Bo Eason, that had
Hmm.
left the military or left pro football after blowing his knee out, became an actor and then a playwright and then a speaker coach to help people learn to repurpose their struggle. And I saw him speak, and I'm telling you, Chris, it was like seeing Mark in the soda shop, man. It was like I knew. Again, it was the storyteller, not the story.
Hmm.
First, it was like the way even his physicality and the way he moved in the room, it was primal. There was just something about it that I connected with before the first words came out of his mouth. I didn't realize how much he had trained his ass off for that kind of work, and it was only later. But he really took me under his wing. He mentored me for 2 years. He taught me everything he knew about storytelling and more. And yeah, I mean, it became a modality for healing myself and making sense of things that didn't make sense. And then over time, this is by like 2017, I did a TED talk and then another TED talk and then another TED talk. And then I started coaching TED speakers. I started doing a lot of work with veterans. But prior to that, in my transition, I had such debilitating anxiety, I couldn't get in front of anybody.
Hmm.
And I knew I had relevant things to say about human connection and trust. I was looking at the churn all around us in the country. I was like, there's something I could offer here, but I had such debilitating anxiety and self-consciousness and stage fright after getting out of the military and just loss of purpose that I couldn't get in front of people. But once I started building the story muscle and working one-on-one with veterans, with Gold Star families, and just helping them tell their stories, and just incrementally, as I was learning things, sharing it with them, um, yeah, I started to get like a real uh, love of this craft. And at some point, the switch flipped, and I never looked back. It just became my obsession. Um, and I think where all the things I'm doing now, are emanations from that love of the craft.
Yeah. So in counseling therapy, we talk about aha moments sometimes. And so you mentioned listening and training other people and hearing their stories. Go, if you can, take us back to that time frame. And if you can remember one of those aha moments, um, I would love for you, if you can, give us a little bit of context of like what you learned about yourself, but I think more to the point, describe what that's like to all of a sudden see yourself and your story in a different light and how that transformed you.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'll cover that at two levels. So the
Okay.
first one was when I was training with Bo, there was a psychiatrist named Dr. Joan Rosenberg who that was the first thing I learned is that Bo would never train with me unless Joan was there. On this, he was like, you're going through some stuff and you're going to process some stuff, and I want to make sure you're safe while we do it. And
Gotcha.
so, um, one of the things that I went through was in telling my backstory, my scar story, as I call it. Bo wanted me to honor the names of guys that I had lost in combat, friends, uh, teammates, and I couldn't do it. It just even saying their names would wreck me. And certainly, I was like, I can't do that from the stage. But he was like, I'm telling you, there's something to that. If you can do that, that's going to have an effect on so many people. And so I worked with Joan, and it was hard. I mean, it was, and there was therapy sessions involved with it, like formal therapy, but then but I never stopped or bailed on the narrative process and the fact that if repurposed, this story could really serve other people. And then ultimately, even talking about my own suicidal ideation, that took until 2019. And that happened in 2015,
Yeah.
but that TED Talk now has over 1 million views. It's shown at the JSOC transition course. It's shown in other places by chaplains. I don't even know how many people come up to me and say, I was in that closet, So both, but going back to saying the names of friends of mine, like once I was able to do that and the snot and hair was flying everywhere, but I now I still do it. Like it's 2026, and every time I do a keynote or a talk, I say at least 5 names of guys that I knew about 1/3 of the way through my talk. And it just the electricity just goes out into the room because I feel them with me. They're with me. I can connect to them. And that emotional coupling in the room starts to happen. And everything's just so authentic and real, and now they feel them too, and I'm keeping their stories alive and I'm keeping them alive. And that's something so primal to it. So there was a self-healing piece of it in doing that I learned. But then there was also this people coming up to me who were listening autobiographically to things I would say, and they locate themselves in the story. And they tell you where they locate themselves in your story. And you're like, oh my God. Like I had no idea. That was the most uncomfortable part for me. I almost bailed on that. And they're like, well, I'm glad you didn't, because thank you. And that to me is what has kept me going, regardless through all of this. Is I do believe the 2 best scar stories we can tell in this world. The second best one is the one you don't want to tell others, and the very best one is the one you don't want to tell yourself.
So true.
Because it's where we all are, right? I mean, we're all, if there's one universal singular in this world, it's struggle. If there's one thing that truly transcends all the other BS in this world, it's struggle. But yet it's the thing we talk about the least.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. Again, thinking I was having a conversation. My last class of the semester was last night, teaching internship 2. So these are master level students that are literally about to graduate here in another week and then join the profession. And I always start my class with this scripture, but because it applies to therapy, but it applies to life. I think it applies to a spiritual life, and it's exactly what you're saying. But it's in the book of Romans. Paul talks about suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces faith, and faith produces excuse me, I'm blanking, character. I mean, I'm butchering it right now. Here it is, my favorite. Here we are in Romans 5:3. Here we go. Not only we rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope, and hope does not put us to shame.
Oh my God. Can you send that to me? That is phenomenal.
Yeah. Not only that we rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope. And so one of the things that I've been chewing on, obviously working in the community, is how well you guys endure and suffer, but yet the character and the hope comes with that suffering. And yet I look at, exactly what you're describing. It applies so much in life to who we are and where we can go if we allow this process. I would argue this is the process of change. Is we have to suffer, and sometimes we don't choose our sufferings, but if we endure that, our character is formed, and out of that character there is now hope. And to your point, when we're sharing a story and going into those dark places and doing these things, it's transformative for ourselves because we're looking at the things that we don't want to look at and sharing the things we don't want to share. But people get a peek inside, and it's that communal aspect and that human interaction that, like you said, the lights come on, we feel it in the room, other people feel it. and it's transformative. I would also argue, and I know I'm going on a tangent, but physiologically, it's true too. You have to tear down the muscles, and you have to do that with repetition so that you can produce character and quite literally new muscle fibers. And then there's hope that you are a bigger, faster, stronger human being in whatever athletic or performance enhancing capability that you're trying to produce.
I I think it's a reality of the natural world, and I love that, man. I love that quote, that scripture. If I've got to get that from you, that is well done, and good on you for applying that contextually, because I think that's spot on. And the other thing though that I would add to that, maybe to anyone listening or watching, is I do not believe that, but although we do suffer through struggle, I also very strongly believe that we are not condemned to suffer, eternally. I think that there is, and I'm not moving down a religious path here. I have my faith,
Sure.
but what I'm saying is, in terms of narrative work, I believe that the element of struggle and the suffering that we experience through struggle is necessary so that we can resolve. I do believe that resolution is as much a biological storytelling, a biological necessity of storytelling, as struggle. I don't think, it's kind of like, if you don't have resolution, then you're a victim.
Right.
You stay in victimhood. And what is awesome about struggle to resolution is it's a 1-2 punch to coming out on the other side. And this is where I think, for our veteran community in particular, and our first responders and our military families, you've run a lot of miles. You've built up these scars that you have, and they're not easy. But the real healing potential for resolution is in how you repurpose, or how generous you are with those scars in the service of other people. And I believe that the part that's below the waterline that we've completely lost is that if we can tap into those scars through stories that we tell in the service of the person across from us, what we do is we allow the other person, because you get a sense of yourself as you do that, as you said, then the other person starts to get a sense of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And when that happens, narrative transportation occurs. We go for the ride, and everybody knows that ride. They've been on it. When someone's telling a story and all of a sudden you're in a trance state, listening to that, and you're processing, you're locating yourself in the story, and you're processing your own stuff.
Yeah.
And that is, to me, is the most generous thing someone can do, and we all have it. Because we all struggle. But the good news is that in doing that lives resolution
100%.
and hope.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's, again, a huge part. So there's all different types of therapists, psychologists, academics. And there's this interesting thing in the field of addictions work, where typically therapists that are in the addictions field tend to have a past themselves struggling with addictions. And there's this very well-known thing that addictions therapists tend to self-disclose a lot more because of the field, and it's power and transformative. And it's something I tell my young students as well. It's similarly, there's power in your story. And depending upon how you're telling it and in the appropriate way, it's everything that you just mentioned. And I think, to your point, the more that people experience other people around them, leaders like yourself in the larger community, sharing these painful stories, it can't help but fuel a sense of creativity, self-exploration, but also bravery of like, okay, if Scott can sit there and tell me about his dark day in the closet, I can go home and talk to my wife about X, or I can share with my friend the thing that I'm struggling with.
And there's something I want to add to this, Chris, that I think is so important that you and Doc do. And I want to continue to bring this into our community as we explore the wonderful benefits of narrative, whether that's on the therapy side, or whether that's, on the sharing side, or whatever you want to call it, social influence side that I do. advocacy. But I think I stumbled upon this, and I want to get your take on this. But it's one of my guys that I really have a lot of respect for in the storytelling field is a guy named Doug Lipman. He's a storyteller. He's been around a lot of years, and he's really gifted. He understands the structure of storytelling and the science of it in a really thoughtful way. And he talks about in storytelling, there's two primary participants in story. And remember, this is 100,000-year-old mechanism, right? That we have. And he says that throughout our history, there's two participants in storytelling. There's the beneficiary and there's the helper. And because storytelling is a sense-making tool for the human brain, the role changes. And I think, as particularly for veterans and people who've been through deep struggle, because you ask yourself, okay, what if I tell my story and I fall apart? What if I tell my story and these things happen to me? What Lippman, I've taken his characterizations, and I think it might help us frame this as we think about it, is so what I've found in working with Gold Star mothers, severe combat trauma, combat wounded, and I've trained them to do TED Talks and a range of other things, is that when you first start working your story, just like when I was talking about, I couldn't say the names of my guys, right? That they literally were stuck in my throat. I was the beneficiary of the story. Yeah. But then Dr. Joan Rosenberg and Bo were the helpers. Even though I was telling the story to them, I was sputtering and it was awful. And they were the beneficiaries and the helpers. And they knew that. And I knew that. I knew my role was the beneficiary. I was not trying to perform the story or do anything with it. I was just trying to move through it and make sense of, and at the time I didn't even recognize that. But at some point, something shifted in that work. And I found myself sharing that same story of suicidal ideation with a buddy of mine who was, guess what, in a very dark place. And in that moment, he became the beneficiary of my story and I became the helper. So I think that in the narrative journey, we actually go through another hero's journey as we birth the story. That starts with, we are the beneficiary of it to make sense of things that don't make sense. And then if we stay on it and we keep working through it, at some point there's a shift and we become the helper. And the people then can be served with that story. But oftentimes we get in too much of a hurry to put our story out there before we have resolved it ourselves. And I think that's where your community is so critical. And it's why I work so closely with Doc Diego at my workshops and everything else, is because there is a necessary component on the front end of this that has to be worked through, at least not every time, but no matter whether you have someone assisting you or not, there's a sense-making part that happens first before you share it with the world.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There is a well-known phrase or idea within my field where somebody that has experienced a significant trauma, could be a childhood abuse, could be I woke up in the middle of a surgery, fill in the blank, something that has impacted them profoundly and probably could have put them in the realm of a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress. Maybe they're there, maybe they're not. But in that retelling of their story, there is a phase and a time where we talk about their trauma is everything. And they've just gotten over the hump of sharing it, typically in therapy or with a close friend, but they're oversharing it without a good grasp on what is actually happening. And they're just getting the relief of dumping it. And so they're dumping it in every avenue and every conversation that they have with other people. And it's actually really unhelpful sometimes for the listener, but also for the individual, because it's wrapped up in who they are. They've self-identified in a positive way that I've been a survivor, but they haven't finished that story. And to your point, I would strongly agree as well. And if somebody hears this and they've experienced that, or they're being self-reflective, like, that's okay. Keep moving through the process. If you're not working with somebody, hey, reach out and connect with any one of our providers, or even just sit down like you've done, sit down with a coach and start working through that story so that you can get past it being everything and it becomes a part of your story, but not the whole story. And I think that's the critical point, is those individuals get stuck in a position where it's their whole story. And when in reality, it should be a piece or a point in their story. And unfortunately, I mean, in the podcast world, as a soft community is pretty small, I know quite a few people that have gone on larger podcasts, shared their story, and unfortunately they weren't prepared for what was coming afterwards, and they're still stuck in that and they're struggling with that. So critical point, excellent point. I'm glad you brought it up.
Yeah, and I've seen that too. And so I think if we're going to keep moving down this road, and we just need to have real honest conversations about, okay, how do we, I just like the language of beneficiary and helper, and this idea that when you go through your story development, whatever it is, it could be grief, it could be, but there's always going to be struggle at the heart of it. There's always going to be a pivotal moment. There's going to be struggle. And then that's the hero's journey, right? I mean, that's the framework that our brain uses. And we're always the protagonist in our story. And so there's always going to be struggle, but you're actually undergoing a new journey whenever you take on a story. It could be any story. You're going to feel clunky. You're going to feel exposed. You're going to feel like, nobody wants to hear that. And that's usually an indicator you're actually sitting on something very helpful.
I want to review a couple of things that I've got. I want to make sure I didn't miss anything. So I think you answered this, but I want to circle back. Your coach, is that how you got introduced to theater? Because going from a soft community to theater is a big environmental shift. Talking and sharing your story is huge. Typically, you guys are pretty tight-lipped individuals. And so I'm curious if there was anything more on why theater.
Talking about a midlife crisis. Bo really was a very profound influence on me, and mainly because he did a one-man play called Runt of the Litter, and it was about him as a runt growing up on a farm in California and becoming a professional football player. And I thought, wow, that's really cool. I mean, what a neat thing to do, to like tell your story like that. And I was already enamored with storytelling at this point, but was watching him and I thought, and he wasn't classically trained. He went to school for theater, but it was after the NFL. And I'm thinking, I've never done anything. I'm 50 years old, and Bo would always kind of hound me about, I needed to do a one-man play on Afghanistan and my experience. And he said, it'll heal you. But what happened was I started working with other coaches in the Florida area, particularly down in Sarasota at Florida Studio Theater. There was one guy named Jason in particular who was an acting coach. But I thought, if I'm going to keep speaking for a living, and I was doing that at that time, I was starting to make a living at it, and I'm going to keep on the nonprofit side teaching veterans and others to tell their story, I've got to get deeper on this craft. And so I thought, I'll take a community acting class. And so I did. And Jason gave us all an assignment to do a 5-minute, one-person show on a totem. And I did mine on a green silly band that my son Braden had given me before a deployment that we called the Magic Silly Band. And it was all about, I told it as the silly band, going to combat, and that I was with my new owner because my main owner had given me explicit instructions to get him home safe. And, it was just like told through the silly band and all the different ways that the band tried to come off in ambushes and senior officers telling me to take it off. But when I was done, like, it really just leveled the audience. Like, they were floored. And we did a little talk back and they were like, that's a play, that should be a play. So somehow Monty and I, my wife, we decided to try it. And I started moving the pen, I think I want to say it was like 2016. And I had no idea what I was doing. I'd never written a play. And I just kept chunking away at it. And then at some point, it started to take some form. I got some real help with people that came to my aid that were great playwrights, and because I talked about it on, that I was working on it. And then eventually, I decided I was going to perform it with a group of other veterans. It became an ensemble. It was no longer a one-person play, and it was it. But I would sneak up to New York once a month and study under Larry Moss and Carl Bury, because I didn't want anybody from the ISF community to know I was doing this. I was terrified that that this would get out that I was studying theater. And then we debuted it in Veterans Day 2018 here in Tampa at the Marriott. We couldn't even get a theater. So we rented the Marriott. We rented our own lights and we performed it, and it really did well. And then it went on tour, and then we filmed it for Amazon Prime. And then at some point, Gary Sinise saw it. And this was after Pineapple Express, and decided to produce it. And we toured with him in 2023. And it changed everything. Now I've got another play coming out called 11 Days that's coming to Tampa December 17 through 20. But all of that started with a little silly band and, standing in a closet holding a pistol. And I'd never been trained for any of that stuff. Not for theater, not for playwriting. I just did it as I went. But at the heart of all of it was storytelling.
I just want to highlight something that in that story about theater and how it all came to be. You guys couldn't even get a theater. And so I love the persistence and the passion of like, well, this is what I'm supposed to do. This is what I'm doing. And so many people probably would have stopped and said, it's not meant to be because I don't have a venue. And instead it's, what are other options? Let me create my own venue. Because at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter. I just got to have a place to do it. Doesn't have to be a theater. Just the resolve in that. And I know it's just a little piece of that story. I love that. In that journey, what was the hardest thing that you had to face about yourself?
Oh man, what a great question. I think there was two things, and it's the thing I still face my now is what Stephen Pressfield calls resistance. It's just the self-sabotage, just the feeling like, who am I to write this play? No one wants to hear this. I'm not a playwright. I'm not an actor. What is my community going to think? They're going to, I'm going to be ostracized for this. It's all that head chatter. And so that was a big one. And then I think the other one was having to recognize that if I was going to do this, I had to be honest with myself. I had to be honest with myself and tolerate myself, because that's one of the hardest things for me to do when I'm storytelling. Is I'm always thinking, okay, I'm being judged. I'm judging myself. I'm terrible at this. Like, there's just a lot of, and maybe that's me. I see it in a lot of other people too. They struggle with it, but is just this idea of tolerating myself enough in that moment to be present for the audience and not get wrapped up in my own crap, and not let it become, like you said, a dumping session. I have to do it for the audience. I have to take off all the armor and just stand there naked and just tell the story and be honest with the story and authentic, and let the story, have a relationship with the story and have a relationship with my audience, and not worry about anything else. That was the hardest thing for me to learn how to do, because in the military, particularly in special operations, like you have to button up, man. Like you can't just stick your jugular out, in a rural tribal shura and be vulnerable. Like that ain't how it works. So it ran against everything that I knew to be true about how to stay safe in the world. And like my acting coach told me, Carl, he said, what kept you alive in combat will kill you on stage.
I love that.
It's true to some degree for us back home in anything that deals with social engagement. What kept you alive in combat will kill you, metaphorically.
Yeah.
When you're trying to authentically influence at home, you can't.
Should be a placard that gets sold and handed out to veterans. I love it. I think that is a.
I believe it. I think it's true. And I only say that because I've had to experience it so many times. I'm going through it now with this play now, Chris. I mean, I'm like, we go into theater this afternoon for the first time, plays in 7 days. And I'm like, oh my God, like, you know, there's stuff I'm sharing in this play that I've never shared publicly. And, you know, it's terrifying. But at the same time, I trust the process enough to know that if I can just tolerate myself and just do it for the audience, not in a performative way, but in an authentic way. Like this is me. This is what you got here. And what we're talking about here is this thing. And this is what I learned. And this is how I changed. Like, that's it. And then let the audience decide. Let the audience do what they're going to do with it. That's not up to me anyway. You know, my job is to have a connection with my story and a connection with the audience. That's it. And I think that's true for all of us, you know.
Absolutely. You know, art in general. If you can connect with the audience, whether it's a sculptor, whether it's a painter, whether it's somebody standing on a stage, if you can connect with the audience, that is a huge hill to climb. And then let them wrestle with, maybe it's a question you're proposing, a story you're telling, whatever it may be. That connection piece, I think, is essential, because at the end of the day, to your point, great storytelling, I mean, that connection has to happen, or should happen, so that all those different variables and concepts, and opportunities, like we've discussed the last little bit, can happen.
I think that's true. And I think, you know, just to go a step further, I think it's true in sales. I think it's true in teaching. I think it's true in coaching. You know, if there's a study, I think it was Haven at DARPA, but said that influence and engagement, the two things that are required more than anything else, are you got to gain and hold someone's attention, and you have to resonate with them emotionally. You know, and so if you think about that for a second, you know, the first one's hard. It's harder than ever to do that, considering attention spans and people are in their phones. But the second one is almost non-existent. I mean, going back to politicians, they're not trying to resonate with anyone emotionally. And if they are, it's anger and fear, right. You know? So what does it take? You know, asking yourself, okay, if you're going to get up and sell a product, or you're going to convince your boss of this thing that you think the company should do, okay. Or if you're a teenager trying to influence your parents, you got to gain and hold their attention, and you've got to resonate with them emotionally. Well, that's storytelling. You know, and the last thing I'll say on this is, what I've found is, it's not just the stories you tell. In fact, I think that's 1/3 of a successful engagement. What I'm teaching in corporate America, what I'm teaching sales professionals, what I'm teaching coaches, cops, if you want to influence someone, it's not the stories you tell, it's the stories you ask to hear. Right? Storytellers are the best listeners in the world. They have a love for story, that they hear it, and they see the pictures in the head of the other party, and they ask thoughtful, open-ended questions that let the other party respond in story. That brings emotional temperature down. It creates emotional resonance, and it accelerates trust. We remember what they say. And I think that's a huge chunk that's missing from today's upswing potential. Because when you ask to hear other people's stories with pure discovery, curiosity, and delight, so that you can see the pictures in the head, what you get is shared perspective. And that's just totally absent today.
On that note, what did you experience, or what did you discover, rather? What did you discover in getting into theater that you're either really, really good at, or you really, really like, and just it wasn't even, you know, on your radar? Like, what do you look forward to? This is your second play that you're rolling out. What do you look forward to in this process now that you've done it before?
I think the soft guys will get this mostly, and the athletes, is actually the practice. You know, the performances are great. The talkbacks are awesome. But for me, it's the work. It's the deep work when I'm out in my garage working on it, because this play has 18 characters. I'm at the edge of my ability massively. each with a point of view, each with some different genders, some are Afghan, some are veterans, but each with a very different point of view and an objective, and they're all trying to get something, and then I've got to play them all in 90 minutes. And so it requires the craft and my instrument. How do I train my instrument to be clear and tension-free and non-judgmental and available? How do I develop a craft that allows my voice to be free and actually fluctuate and modulate between these different characters so that who's who? And how do I just stay present, through this 90 minutes and not get outside my head and judge myself from the air? That's 90% of that is work I do alone. Just the deep work of that I've spent 15 years developing. But I got to give all props to my mentors in special forces who showed me how to do that deep work when I was learning to shoot and learning to do other skills, and just this relationship to practice. That to me is the best news for the veteran community, is that we don't have to leave that love of practice and deep work behind. We can take that with us into whatever profession we want, and it will inform at a very high performance level. And that's what I look the most forward to. I absolutely love it. I was astounded at how easily that parlayed into theater. I had no idea. And it was so grounding, and it just made me fall in love with the storytelling even more, because I'm like, well, I understand, I've never been classically trained, but I know what it's like to work.
Right.
And I'll work alone until I collapse, and I know how to recover, and all those things. I'm just so grateful to the soft world for imparting that on me so that I can carry it into this, because that's what sustains me.
I was thinking through several things right on the tail end of that. I think you guys, just to echo your point, you guys are expert learners. And from what I've seen with individuals that are struggling with transition as well, it's like once they figure out what that next step is, and they realize, oh, a lot of what I did in the past is actually translatable to whatever venue or objective I'm doing now. It's just the details are a little bit different. I can still attack it with the detail and the repetition day in and day out. I love when I see clients, those lights come on, because it's like, okay, I understand this. I know how to do this, and I can do this really, really well. I just got to take some of what I was trained and experienced over here and apply it over here in a new, meaningful way. And it's like the lights come on and they get running, which is powerful. What you just shared similarly.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that, I think there is something to this whole thing that Ivan Tyrrell says about movement and meaning being inextricably linked, that when we're meaning seeking, meaning assigning creatures, but when we move, we make meaning, just movement. I found that to be true for me when I'm working out, or if I'm in the shower, like just different things where movement occurs. I am more creative. I find answers. And I do think there's kind of this misnomer in transition, particularly for veterans, more specifically for soft guys and girls, that, like somehow we're supposed to contemplate the meaning of transition and discover what it is that we're going to do next. It's like some dude sitting on the side of a mountain admiring his navel. Like when in our history did we ever do that shit? Like, no. Special operators, we find meaning through functional movement. We move and we discover and we iterate. How is it any different when we come home? Like, I think and people, they shake their head at me, and I get it. Because I even listen sometimes to my own bio. I'm like, wow, that sounds really crazy, but it's okay, because I'm moving, and I'm as long as I'm focused on staying relevant to the people I serve, and relevance is my metric. And I'm just reinventing myself and finding new iterations of me to stay relevant. I mean, I can live with that all day long. I'll take that all the way to the end. That's how my father left this world. he pursued relevance all the way until the end. And some things worked, some things didn't, but he was always iterating and moving towards relevance. And I like that for me. And I think that there is something to it for us. And I don't think it's unique to veterans either. I think it's humans in general. If we just can give ourselves permission to pursue movement as an intention, and that we actually find meaning in the movement versus, okay, I'm not going to move until I identify what it is I'm moving toward. I don't think that's the way we're wired. Personally, I think that we find movement. Remember one of my team sergeants, Homer. That was his call sign because he looked like Homer Simpson, and the dude was like 50. He was 51 years old. He was the oldest team sergeant I ever knew, but he was so smart, and he would get so frustrated with me because I was a young, brand new team leader, and he would say, "Damn it, sir!" He'd have like, "We got 71% of the information we need. We'll figure out the rest while we're walking." And because I had to get everything perfect, and he's like, "No, we gotta start walking." And I look back now, and I think he was right. I mean, it was because you got to iterate and move, and it's in that you figure stuff out. And I'm not saying doing it blindly, but I just think that it is a pathway through the ambiguity of transition, to trust functional movement and the way that we learned to navigate the world as operators. I don't think we have to leave that one in the team room.
Mm-mm. Yeah. All right, let's get some logistics out of the way, and we'll wrap this thing up here in a little bit. Tell us about the play. What are the plans for it? Obviously, you guys are premiering on the 17th here in Tampa. By the way, I'm looking forward to seeing it. I'll be down there. Yeah, but tell us about if you guys have future plans of where else it'll be, but obviously share about what's going on the 14th through or the 17th through the 20th.
Yeah, so our nonprofit is called Task Force Pineapple, and it was originally formed to help with our Afghan allies getting out of the country when that 2021 when that happened. But after about a year of that, it just got to where it was untenable, and so we repurposed Pineapple and merged it with our other nonprofit, The Hero's Journey, and we focused almost completely on helping warriors, first responders, and their families find their voice and tell their story in transition. So that's what we do. We run workshops and we train veterans and others to tell their story, in whatever way they need to do it, to include job interviews. But the other thing that we do is there's kind of an education and healing component to the storytelling. In other words, we do theatrical presentations of military experiences from the stage. And we have 2 plays right now. I'm super excited. One is Last Out, Elegy of a Green Beret. That's what we started talking about, my first play. I'm no longer in that, but we have an all military and military family member cast. It's still touring. It will tour again in 2026. So if you go to tfpineapple.org, you can find the locations of that. You got to go see that show. Like it's also on Amazon Prime. If you look up, and I was going to tell you too, Chris, if it's helpful, I can get you the link to the film version.
Okay.
And if you want to use it in your training, you can just use it. I mean, okay. There's several for, maybe for therapists that want to have a better understanding of, the long war and modern war. It's a pretty good little tool. So if that's helpful, let me know and I can arrange to get that to you. But if anybody wants to watch it and they can't get to that play, it's on Amazon Prime called Last Out. And then our new play, the one I'm in, is a one-man play based on the book that I wrote after the collapse in Afghanistan. And it's the play is called 11 Days, the story of Operation Pineapple Express. And it's a 90-minute one-act play where I portray 18 characters during the 11-day withdrawal. And the whole premise of it is me testifying after the House Foreign Affairs Committee sham of a testimony from my own backyard about what really happened in those 11 days from various points of view that did not make it into that testimony. And just kind of telling the story, from that point of view. That is December 17 through 20 at the HCC Performing Arts Center in Ybor City. You can go to tfpineapple.org to get tickets. All proceeds go back into our nonprofit. And then we do a talk back after every show. So you can stay and, we really focus on the moral injury that was inflicted on so many of our veterans by violating what they knew to be true. And then in 2026, we're going to tour the country. We're going to go to cities all over the country and take this play. I think our first stop in January is in New York City.
Awesome.
So we're starting big, and we're going to Virginia Military Institute after that. If anybody is listening to this and they would like to host the play, which we bring it to communities, and you're interested in that, I'm sure if you contact Chris and let him know, we're happy to get you in touch with our tour manager and get it on the docket. We're building the tour schedule right now. What I tell people is get out and see the show in December if you can, and then decide if it's something you'd want to host. It's a great thing to bring to your community.
Tell us a little bit about the talkback. What does that entail, and what typically comes out of that?
Well, storytelling opens us up. We call it our emotional breaching tool because we address the moral injury. In this play, we address the abandonment of our allies. We address America turning the page on our 20-year war and our veterans who fought it. We address a lot of issues that our Gold Star family members asking themselves, what did my son die for? We address a lot of tough issues. And when the play is over, and there's civilians in the audience, politicians in the audience who've never heard the crack of a round, never been around it like you have. And all of a sudden now they have a whole different perspective. And so the lights come up, and I come out on the stage, or in the case of Last Out, all the actors come out on the stage, and we facilitate a talk back with the audience. And this is that whole, it's not the stories you tell, it's the stories you ask to hear. At this point, everybody's ready to talk because they've been emotional resonance, right? They've been moved and they have something to say. And so we have a talk as a community. I keep it very apolitical. I put that out up front. Some people have there's emotional lightning coming out of their fingertips. Doc Diego is working the room. We have other counselors there. It's really beautiful. And it's just a community sitting down talking with each other about a hard topic. Sometimes those things, man, they'll go longer than the play. I'm not even kidding.
I'm sure.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. And they have to run me out. I'll stay in there and talk as long as anybody wants to talk. And I'm usually the last guy to leave the theater, because I have had so many encounters with Vietnam War veterans and children of World War II and Korean War veterans and Gold Star mothers. And I mean, it's that part for me is my favorite. Of all the performance part, it's the talk back and hearing from even people that didn't like what I had to say. That's fine. That's what art's for. Right. But can a brother get some civil discourse while we talk about it, And that's what typically comes out of the talkbacks, Chris, is we leave with a shared perspective, and I feel like that is the biggest gift that this performance gives is you can locate yourself in the story, make sense of things for yourself, but also at a collective level, I think we have a deeper shared perspective and a sense of one another when we leave the show than when we came in.
That's really interesting. I hadn't thought about this because I didn't know much about the talkback. I knew you all did it. Actually, one of our providers just had a table up in Panama City. I think it was Panama City or in the Panhandle for 11 days. Yeah, Pensacola. Sorry. Yep. But I think, again, going back to the larger community of America, but even the community of the individuals that walk in and listen to this play, I think you guys are facilitating something that is not happening on a national level on a large scale, which is cracking the nut of, hey, we're going to get people emotionally engaged, but then we're actually going to have a conversation. And that I think is critically important. As you know, so much of, some of our partners in the soft community, they do such a great job. Let's say the weekend retreats or the week-long retreats, they go and they connect with the veteran and they really crack that nut. And then they try and do really good handoffs to some of our clinicians, so that, okay, the nut's cracked, if you will, emotionally, and now we can really start getting some movement in transformative. But in a community, right? You guys have taken almost that model, not that you modeled it after that, but you've taken that mechanism and expanded it into a community event, which I think is awesome, because now, to your point, hey, we can get people that are pushing back and say, hey, I really didn't like this, but that may transform you next time, because maybe it was some helpful feedback, maybe some constructive feedback on something that you're like, noted, actually, I think I can change this character. It may be differing positions on experiencing the war and whatnot. And I think as a community as a whole, what an opportunity for individuals to come and participate, quite literally, in the event itself, and have an opportunity to impact you, but also the individual that may be down the row, that they're never going to have an opportunity to run into that person and have that discussion, but you guys facilitate that.
That's a great point. And I think what's critical, and this is not just true from the stage, but in storytelling in general, is in order for that conversation to happen the way you described it, is you have to give all of yourself in the telling of the story. Like that's the trade-off, is you have to deliver the story with complete authenticity, and you have to put it out there with your emotional point of view, and be willing to take whatever comes with that. You can't filter, you got to tell the story with complete generosity. And I think that's what's missing from society today. When we share our stories, we filter and we hold back, and it's like, it's so opaque.
Yep.
That there's no substance, and there's no connection. And so, in order for those things that you just described, that are so miraculous, like that's really important. The other thing is that we, like the tables in the lobby, what we're also trying to do is to work more closely with other veterans groups, other advocacy groups who are doing deep work. But we tell them, like, hey, we're not interested in being the prima donna here. We are an emotional breaching tool. We are a supporting effort. When they walk out that door, they are more ready to talk to you than when they went in it. Right? So whoever needs to be in the lobby that can address these problem sets, or however it needs to come up in the talk back, let's do that, because that's what communities do. That's what we're supposed to do. And I don't know, man, I've really, I do think we're on to something. We're small, but I think we've done 40 cities with the first play. It's what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. We started with a U-Haul van and putting 28,000 miles on it, and it culminated with Gary Sinise. And I think we'll do something big with this one, even if big means working with a group like yours and creating an environment where you guys are reaching people even deeper because of somebody locating themselves in the story. Again, it goes back to relevance, right? It goes back to, all right, how are we demonstrating relevance for the community and the people we serve? Well, if that's your metric, then you're almost guaranteed to do the right things. And so and we're learning as we go. But yeah, I think I'm excited. I'm nervous as a performer, but I'm excited about what I know is possible for the social impact.
Absolutely. I'm really excited. I haven't been to 11 days. It's definitely on my list now, but I'll be there next week. For Last Out. I'll be there for 11 days. But I would encourage anybody hearing this, in the near future, in the distant future, identify when one of these plays is coming nearby. If not, bring it to your community. And at the end of the day, this is an opportunity for individuals in your community to have an honest conversation, hear the conversation that Scott is starting, and help transform, our local communities and our larger community, and get more exposure to hearing and being transformed at that cellular level, because that's going to ultimately be what changes things on a national level.
That's so good, man. You're spot on, and that's spot on, and that's really all we're trying to do here. And it's one conversation at a time. And even if you have like really rigid points of view on whatever, veterans issues, immigration, you know, um, getting a shared perspective through storytelling is never a bad thing. And if nothing else, it calms rigidity, and God knows we need to calm some rigidity in this country.
Well said. Scott, you got anything before we wrap up?
No, I appreciate everything you guys do, and I appreciate the time. I love long form communication and platforms like this. Because I do think the upswing is possible, and I just hope that anybody that's watching or listening, that's either out there sticking and moving, bottom up, or contemplating it, that you keep going, because we need it. And it is not only there is a macro precedent for this in this country, and I think we are definitely close to an upswing, but it's going to take that kind of work. And so I hope people keep pushing.
Absolutely. Thanks, Scott. Thanks for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe wherever you're watching or listening. And please share this content with your networks.